Welcome back to the Restart Pod. Cool week. Fable happened. I believe all three of us have been playing with it. Damon was, I think, technically the first to like do anything because I had it installed by Homebrew and had the longest time figuring out why I couldn't access Fable. Maybe just kind of like go around like experiences, thoughts, opinions on what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I can start. Most of it has been relatively mundane. Candidly, like I just was kind of not noticing that much difference in a lot of the tasks that I was doing. That said, there was one anecdote that really stood out as being qualitatively different. There's no way for me to track, given that it's only been out for a couple of days, how quantitatively different this is. But
Mm-hmm.
I have a process in which I use agents to effectively run down a relationship network graph in the same way that like kind of LinkedIn uses, primary and secondary connections, right? Like if I want to talk to somebody that I don't have a direct connection to, what is the shortest path of warm introductions, basically, that could get me to that person. And so I have this constant task trying to run with that with like a relatively short list of like kind of folks, targets, if you want to call them that. And Fable was, again, anecdotally and qualitatively, head and shoulders above Opus 4.8 at that task. Basically, he kind
Interesting.
of shaved off a number of nodes and then also was like, again, qualitatively better at strategically like, oh, you want to talk to person X, here's a logical path to getting a warm intro to person X. So that's kind of been the only case in which it's really been better. It's done a couple of bug fixes in my Claude code instance and that kind of thing, somewhat unremarkably so, but the only real kind of again anecdote that I've got so far in the handful of days we've been able to test it here is that one, which is interesting.
Is this like when you're describing the difference between what you had with 4.8, is that just like a matter of like efficiency? Like I'm not grasping what felt different about your anecdotal case.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the quality, the clarifying question. I think the way that I could best describe it is, let's say that I want to invest in Anthropic, given this is
Hmm.
the Fable, right? And so it's like, in order for me to find a connection to Dario is very challenging. Like, I don't have a direct connection to Dario. I don't really know anyone in Dario's inner circle. Um, but as a different example, I was trying to get to folks at Physical Intelligence because I really like that company. And turns out I was connected to someone who used to work with one of the founders of Physical Intelligence at Google DeepMind. So
Mm.
Fable found that connection, that derivative connection of you are connected to someone who worked with someone that started Physical Intelligence both at Google DeepMind at the same time. Why don't you ping that person because you recently met with them, 2 months ago about other topic Y, about getting you a catch up on their topic Y that's valuable to them while trying to get you a warm intro to the folks at Physical Intelligence. So that like
I see.
kind of derivative connection had not been made before. Like
I
like
see.
Opus 4.8 had that task all week and hadn't come up with that angle, whereas Fable kind of one shotted that, if that makes sense.
I see. What about you, Shashi? Anything interesting come of it or middle?
Yeah. I've really been impressed with this Mythos class model, Fable 5. And my use cases have been, I've had two use cases. One is identity theft. So I've been fighting these fraudsters who are trying to steal my identity and open bank accounts, credit lines. They were successfully able to SIM swap my phone, like take my phone number and quote unquote upgrade it at this like
Mm.
small AT&T store, and then I've been going through the rigorous process of getting credit reports, figuring out what else they've been trying to do, and going through that process. I've been using Fable 5 to say, here's what I've experienced so far. Help me navigate this entire problem of identity fraud, identity theft, and it's gone through all the attack vectors. And the way I've been using it is I ask it to write a prompt for my Claude Chrome extension, and I
Hmm.
take the prompts it writes, I stick it in the Claude Chrome extension, I log into whatever system, Gmail or otherwise, and have it go do work. And so I'm just copy paste monkey between Fable 5 on one side and Opus 4.8 in my browser, but
Mm.
it's doing a really good job. I've been very impressed with it. The other use case is that I'm a specific kind of investor in that I like to find undercovered semiconductor stocks that are critical to the next layer of the supply chain. And so I prompt I prompted Fable 5 to dig deep and uncover stocks that fit my my edge thesis, which is that they are undercovered by major hedge funds. I don't want to play a game against Jane Street or Citadel. I'm going to lose that game. I want to invest in stocks that are relatively undercovered by analysts that are at the next phase of development, whether that's photonics or 800-volt power supply or glass substrates, et cetera. And so I like to find these thematic companies that live underneath where analysts are covering and that don't have the kind of liquidity that would be meaningful for Jane Street. If there was enough liquidity on the float daily that Jane Street could go in with a thesis and have it be material for them, then that's above the threshold I want to invest in, because then I'm fighting Jane Street. I want to fight below that, where the gain and the volume traded is material for me, but it's not material for Jane Street. And because they would
I have
move
a
the price
question
if they
based
bought
on
enough.
so like what you generally described like makes sense. I have two questions. So like, why not just let Fable do everything? Why hand off to 4.8? Like, well, I guess like why be in the center
Yeah,
of
in that
that? Like, why not
scenario,
just
what
let
I'm
it do
doing
its thing?
is the deep market research. I'm having Fable identify the targets. I'm having Fable define the limit order prices, and then I go through and I overlay. I have a world model. I overlay my world model of geopolitics and what I think the incentive structures are for different parties that play on the global stage, and I overlay
Right.
that onto these stocks, and that leads to naturally a very narrow set. And so, with my experience, Fable has gone through many more potential companies and gone deeper on the research than Opus had prior. And so I've got a lot more material to work with now than I did before.
Well, I mean, insofar as like the like in describing the identity theft thing, like rather than letting Fable do the end to end of like let it interact with the browser or that sort of stuff, you said you're doing a handoff between I'm invoking Fable, asking it to give me stuff to tell 4.8 to do. Why?
Yeah, this is my. I imagine there's a more efficient way to do this, and you'll tell me. What I like to do is use the command line interface with Fable. So I'm using command line
Yeah.
interface, extra high effort with Fable, and then I have it write prompts, and then I copy and paste it over to the browser. I'm not sure how to give it direct control over the browser plugin. Maybe there's
If you do, I mean,
a
like,
switch.
yeah, I mean, like, it's still a question with it. I maybe like, does Claude in Chrome have Fable or no?
If it did, it'd be overkill. It's doing pretty, instructional tasks in the
Okay.
browser. So I
Okay.
don't even know if it'd be worth the tokens.
I see.
I don't
Yeah, I
think
mean,
it
like,
does, for the record. It doesn't. Not
I
the
see.
plugin. You can do it in Cowork, but you can't do it in the plugin directly.
Yeah. At least in the CLI, if you do like /Chrome, like you'll be able to like have it connect to your extension, then run for you. I guess so. Segue into like what I found the most interesting. If you look at the benchmarks for Mythos, like I guess Fable and these like Mythos class models, like they do a general like comparison about like how much of an improvement it is between not improvement, but like where it's losing relative to Mythos and how much of an improvement it is over Opus 4.8. Most of it visually seemed fairly like incremental, like just like looking at the difference between numbers, like it's like a 80% versus an 85%, that kind of thing. But the one that stuck out to me is really interesting. I wouldn't expected for like what this model was made for, hypothetically, like at least it being pitched as such a big cybersecurity thing, is its spatial intelligence jumped like many 10 percentage points effectively. Which, especially if you're doing stuff in browser, I was wondering like if you saw Fable navigating that better. But it sounds like that test is still pending. At least insofar as like my time with it, the quality of code, like you can tell it's like incrementally better or it's more efficient at like kind of like reaching the result effectively. But I mean, I don't know. To me, I think the spookiness of the mythos and whatever, like obviously a lot of that is a marketing scare, and now everyone's super excited to get on it. But it's like improvement, nice to have so far. I don't think I have like an analogy for like what Damon described that felt like a sudden like that wouldn't have been possible before. But Twitter is obviously kind of chock full of those. Um, I'm curious, Shashi, if in describing the identity theft thing, if you ran into a safeguard.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. Yeah, so it was very explicit that date of birth, social security numbers, the kinds of things that you would naturally run across in
Hmm.
credit reports. For example, to create an account, you need to put in a social security number. It wouldn't let me provide it directly. It would require that I put that information into the browser manually.
Oh,
Um, but that's probably not what you meant. I mean, I'm not trying to
yeah,
distill a model. Um, I'm not trying to do something that somebody else might find threatening.
right. I
But it
guess
did draw some clear lines.
yeah, my main curiosity to that end is that like every time one of these models releases, there's always like a community of people like poaching how to like prompt inject and break past whatever the like prompted safeguard limitations are effectively. Um, and like I'm wondering if like categorically the stuff you're asking about that was identity theft resolution related sparked up a concern that would have
Mm.
caught as like a false positive.
No,
Um,
I didn't. No false positives there.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've seen because especially like with how big of a cybersecurity like ordeal they made out of this one. I don't think there's been a case of people bypassing a safeguard. Like I haven't seen anything go viral about it. But I know there's obviously like a group of like 100 something people in SF who are just like maliciously attempting to pwn Mythos technically and see what they can do with it. Um,
I wonder what you think about
anyway.
the API transition, because this is really the moment
Mm.
where it feels real that we're moving from a subscription world to an API world. And the transition I thought was really well handled, where the
Yeah.
subscription has access until June 22nd, and then API only.
Yeah. I mean, for what is ultimately like a fairly boring, like I mean, like conceptually boring product surface, like it's just like a productivity. Yep. Like Mythos marketing team, like the folks who did Mythos's marketing were very clever, like supremely clever, where they're like encouraging movement of behavior away from what a consumer would traditionally like, but in a very digestible way. Um, I know, I mean, especially with like some of the folks I work with, like the API concerns have especially coming up a lot because just like culturally, there's a bigger, wider concern about um, LLM spend. But now people are just like, I just have to roll with the tide and figure out a way to like make API spend somewhat acceptable because now everyone wants to try Fable because everyone in my company has heard about Fable and wants the tools to use it, but is not going to spend consumer level money to try it, even if it's like free or whatever right now. So they've been doing. I mean, they've had this marketing masterclass for LM products for a number of years. That it's just the cycle of things. I'm remembering the times when like ChatGPT was like forerunner and Sam Altman was doing like appeals to the government and Supreme Court asking for like we have to start regulating these models, et cetera, while they perceived that they had like intelligence edge, and now the same thing is happening here, and that just all feeds into the marketing cycle, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there's, I guess, just commenting on Luxor's last point, like regulatory capture makes sense so long as you're ahead.
Mm.
If you're winning, then sure, pull the ladders up. If you're not, then we got to leave the ladders down. So, uh, yeah, strategically, that's smart. I don't think it's probably going to play out with any substance. Um, Two comments, I guess, with respect to API pricing and transition. This is the first real world test we'll get of is if there actually is any pricing power. Meaning, is Fable going to stick and people are going to pay for it in the API, or are folks going to, you know, stick to the subscription and kind of not go to Fable? We'll see how that kind of plays out in real time. Most of the folks in my circle are pretty excited about Fable right now. My guess is that enthusiasm will wane and they'll stick with the lower priced option for the vast majority of things. We'll see if that's true. I also think there's a chance that the API restriction is pretty short lived until Anthropic can secure the compute necessary for it. Like they increased usage leading up to the rollout. OpenAI through their ChatGPT, what will become, we think, the Codex app, has kind of taken the counter positioning of reducing costs. So, similar to the regulatory capture strategy, Anthropic is going to go through a real time test here of how much pricing power they have in the market. and for all their enterprise clients that are reasonably price insensitive when most of their revenue base doesn't care about consumer, right? We'll see. I mean, I think my guess is Fable isn't a big enough change to drive a bunch of folks to the API pricing long term.
Mm.
They'll catch a momentary blip on it, and then folks will continue with the max plan. Anthropic's compute constraints will unlock as they continue to lease out data center space, etc. And then they'll roll Fable into the subscription plan, would be my guess.
That's interesting, Damon. I got to the same conclusion from a different route, which is these models always start off, they're most expensive, and then they create a version of it, kind of like the Opus 4.6 to 4.8 transition, where it ends up getting cheaper, more efficient for them to offer the same class model. And yes, their hardware definitely opens up. And so I would imagine like the starting price, I think is 10 million input tokens, sorry, $10 per million input token, $50 per million output tokens. And I would expect it only goes down. I think the model is good enough that I'm going to start as a buyer of the API tokens. I like it enough to be a payer, kind of contrary to like our previous discussions about like our frontier models worth paying for.
Really?
Like I'm willing to pay for this one, but I also kind of expect the cost to go down over time.
Right.
So I don't mind.
Yeah, they will. They definitely will.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting. Sorry, Lex, I cut you off, but it's also worth noting this is the first like real model trained on the Vera Rubin class, the Vera Rubin GPU from NVIDIA. So they also probably have to run this at inference in different chip clusters. And so that's also leading to the price. So to your point, like Shashi, once there are more of those chips online, then they're going to be able to drive that price down regardless. So we'll see price crash for a number of reasons. I think that's definitely right.
I'm curious, I guess, like I understand your rationale. The thing I found is that like the moment, so both Dave and I are running these sort of like background agent things, and all my usage there is API costs. I was just looking at like my business card bill for the API costs over. I was just kind of like letting it run. Like the problem is a lot of the coding I do, a lot of the coding output comes from like I will / goal something and let it spin off overnight and then wake up in the morning and just like make sure it's like progressing the way I want it to. And I hit like on one of these $200 a month plans, not with Claude, but with Codex. Like I hit the wall and it was like, you don't have any more usage until like Wednesday. And like that alongside seeing the bill I was getting from Anthropic, like in an enterprise context, not that heavy, but as like a solo person, I was like, that's a lot of revenue. Like that's a lot of revenue to be losing. But like I'd probably be like fairly API resistant. Like right now, I do anticipate costs will go down. But I will say is that like one nuance in a lot of this discussion is that especially as these models are rolling to the cloud platforms, a lot of like the bigger you are, the more likely it is that you're like basically forced into API usage to get any of these models now. If you're like interested in Forefront, like you're not going through an Anthropic like handshake. It's that you already have Azure, GCP, AWS, though like relationships are opening up that any one of these frontier labs is hosting an option through the cloud provider you already have a walled garden with. So the API options like the forced default, despite how unhappy people are, like the fact that they know that the max is much better value for money. It's just that their like regulatory requirements or whatever pins them down effectively. That what I'm seeing, again, not my case, what's happening is that like there was enough enthusiasm successfully garnered around what this model was that like it was an existing migraine or headache or like anxiety about like, oh my God, we're going to have to like get through turning on these models for everyone in my org and they're all going to be API spend. And now the dialogue is more so, okay, Fable sounds really impressive. I'm okay with testing the API spend rather than trying to like maneuver my way around.
The harnesses, I know they're super boring to talk about. The model switching, picking the right model for the right problem, rather than ham-fisting like the best model at every center my div is like the time where the harnesses really pay off. And there are, as we've talked about, there are some really good open source models, Qwen, Kimi, for like a lot of routine tasks where you don't need a a Mythos class model, my uses where I'm happy to pay for the API costs are me going back and forth the model on something that's very important and very intensive. So it requires my brain share, but it also gets amplified by the model. If it's a task I was kicking off overnight, I might not think that way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to that end, maybe with knowing that we have to do a short-ish recording, we can talk about Apple a little bit on model harnesses specifically for Gemini. The WWDC happened this week. Stock went down a little bit, but is like stable. Did y'all watch any of it? Like, got the summary or no?
Just the recaps. I didn't actually watch the presentation itself.
I didn't watch it either.
All in all, pretty like middle, like nothing super stunning. Like there are some demos of like the new Siri, Apple Intelligence. Like they're interestingly to me, like a stuff that stuck out is it seems that they are trying to take a shot at Willow and Whisper. Like they're trying to enhance like dictating to your phone as a general experience that lives across a lot more of the app. Nothing about AirPods or wearables enhanced. They teased out some more work in like an intent-based UX effectively, but nothing substantive there, just like kind of like conceptual. And more stuff, at least at the developer level, that stuck out as interesting to me is they're giving you a way to program mobile apps that you can directly control what runs on like the Metal kernel of the embedded chips that Apple runs. Directionally insinuating or like suggesting like a little bit more promotion of like if you're an app developer, you can run your edge applications directly through iPhone Metal effectively, which is fairly interesting, like new, I guess, and stuck out as like one thing to sit with or act on, especially when you see all these apps that are doing like image recognition enhancements for whatever use case or LiDAR or something for like effectively using what that hardware is that in everyone's pocket and turning into a consumer use case.
Yeah, Apple's paying Google $1 billion a year to use Gemini. That's the real story, as I can tell. Rather than rolling their own, they're now a renter of an AI model rather than a builder of an AI model. To be seen. I mean, I think the cynicism around Siri being so bad for so long means that the expectations are very, very low. I know they emphasized AI in this keynote. I don't really know why, because no one has any want or need or expectation, I think, of Siri at this point. Everyone's kind of come up with their own workflow that doesn't really go through the Siri critical path. So to be seen. Also worth noting that this was Tim Cook's last WWDC.
Right.
So kind of hand off to John Turnus, and it may be that he's setting up Turnus for some nice reveals in his next one.
Yeah, Shashi's last thought was kind of mine, in that it was almost purposely abbreviated, just given the transition of leadership and not kind of, stealing the thunder, so to speak, of kind of what's coming next. The 1 billion is interesting because it's exactly what Google pays Apple for the Google search being dominant on Safari. So I wonder how they came up with that number. But neither here nor there. But yeah, there's some interesting things in that. I think historically, over the last, call it decade, probably slightly longer than that, there has been very little innovation pressure on Apple's hardware devices because all of the use cases were effectively solved for. Everything everyone was doing was basically, had more than enough capabilities, whether that be the chips running in the iPhone or the cameras, etc., for everybody to do it. We're now entering this paradigm, I think, where that's no longer the case, and there's going to be latency demands given the AI that's happening on device, given the kind of larger payloads, workloads that are kind of delegated to agents running behind the scenes across all these various things, whether it be the MacBook, the iPad, iPhone, AirPods, watch, etc. And so I think Apple is gearing up for being able to push forward on the frontier for what's going to ultimately probably end up just being faster and better inference, right? How can you do inference faster without reducing the quality? How can you deliver people the speed they're used to while having agents doing kind of medium to long range tasks? I think that's what we're going to see the biggest change in. And so I don't think where how Apple is positioning themselves where AI is a better Siri. I think it's how do you get the same responsiveness that you've become accustomed to in the iPhone while your agents become increasingly more capable, whether that's delegating of agents to on device tasks or whether that's sending them to the cloud, right? And so they're working in partnership with Gemini to say, how do we make sure Apple Silicon is able to run Gemini as well as possible, while also being able to offload bigger tasks to the cloud and not disrupting the iPhone experience people are already used to.
And there's also going to be an element, I mean, like traditional platform library play, that by having app developers able to run on silicon, like you get discovery of use cases that are like run closer to that responsive experience. Like we already kind of saw it, like it was at least teased. I don't think there was like a demo actually showcasing this, but like one of the most common use cases of like what you do with a camera with some level of intelligence behind it on your iPhone is like you scan nutritional data and log it to your app. Like we've seen a number of apps go viral in this way. And they said they're going to bake that into like the native experience of the health app, which like kind of part of platform capture. But you can imagine that if someone cracks like a new ML model doing XYZ and that becomes a popular app paradigm, that the relationship between like, oh, we need Gemini for general intelligence and delegation on device, the stuff that we want to be responsible for, like app developers have already proved this out for us. So we'll just adopt and continue.
Yeah, Apple has the burden of incremental innovation on, let's say, find me that photo of little Jimmy riding a bike when he was about 5 years old. Or like you're saying, the health app improvement. It can be incremental and it can live in that zone of incremental product improvement. That's not where Anthropic is. That's not where OpenAI is. Those newer companies need to show groundbreaking innovation. Apple just needs to show continual incremental innovation. Chances are no one's really even in the ballpark of disrupting them.
Right. Yeah, I think this slow care. I was listening to Tony Fadell, so famously the person behind like the iPod Nest thermostats, like one of the like in the same way I think like Boris Cherny's being looked at Anthropic today, like he was the same kind of dude for Apple back in the earliest days of them getting off the ground. I was listening to him talk about Apple's position generally. I think like rightfully so, is that like we trust Apple, and the slow rolling is like a feature of like the cultural establishment that they have, which is like they're not under like a significant financial pressure to win a race. At the same time, like they have brand trust because they do things so cautiously and slowly. That's not even like their quote unquote race to lose or win. They're just like very sideline and comfortably so. Like they don't have to be in the rush for AI, and they can shelve that responsibility elsewhere, especially since they own like user platform, app library, developer library, can back a lot of their work with background agents that other people are already making, and they can just continue to do that at least for the next couple of years, and it wouldn't be a loss. Cool.
All right.
We'll wrap
Story
there.
number 3: SpaceX is pricing tonight and trades tomorrow. So that's the big drop, is that SpaceX is raising on the order of $75 billion, which would put about 3 times the size of Saudi Aramco as the biggest raise in history. There's lots of marketing around this, like $250 billion of demand for $75 billion of float, but the reality is that's kind of marketing. This is a company that's trading. The expectation it's going to trade, on the order of 1.8 trillion at open, and that's like 95 times their revenue, and it's not a profitable company yet. So my read, this is very speculative. I'm not investing, and I would expect a significant drop at some point because this is fundamentally about creating liquidity for earlier investors. It's not about raising the capital purely, let's say. But anyway, that's my read. Most of this company, 85% of the governance is still held in private hands, meaning the public market is really just kind of along for the ride, just like a SPV investor would be. So you don't really have any control in the public market.
Yeah, my only thoughts are reportedly as high as 70 billion in demand from retail. So meaning non-professional investors, non-ETFs. We know the ETF and index lockup periods have been altered for this. So I think I see this playing out one of two ways. You're going to get either an initial spike as soon as this thing hits retail because there's so much pent up demand for having exposure to AI and kind of Elon Inc. for that matter. There's also pent up speculation around how quickly Tesla is going to merge with this. And so people are wanting to buy that lottery ticket before those two things happen. I think you see that initial spike. I think you either see a falling pretty rapidly after that once kind of the professional investor lockup periods uh, are over basically, and there's some staggered lockup periods. So depending on how quickly the price rises, the lockup periods are variable based on that kind of change in price. And so I think you could start to see that slide sooner rather than later, depending on how aggressive that initial uptick is. The question in my mind is whether or not the forced buying from the indexes sustain the price and stabilize it. Because in theory, you're going to have a lot of passive buyers who don't actually know they're entering this position having to enter the position as soon as the index pick it up. And so the question in my mind is whether or not that creates kind of a price buoying where it stabilizes around that 1.5, 1.8 trillion number, or if it actually crashes back down to what I think we would all, speculate as a reasonable fair value, which is probably somewhere in the I don't know, 800-900 billion probably given. I mean, I also think I'm not exactly sure what number you were citing there, Shashi. I don't know if your valuation multiple on revenue included the new Google deal or not. The latest reports I saw was it's about 35 times revenue, which is actually kind of in line with kind of hypergrowth companies in the public market. It's not roughly 10 to 15 times X revenue with that Google contract. Again, I'm not exactly sure what you're citing there, but that's the most recent reports that I saw. So yeah, I'm kind of in alignment with you. I think you're going to get an initial spike, which is basically the public being exit liquidity for private investors. But then because the indexes have to pick it up so fast because of its valuation and because of the change in the rules, I don't know if that's going to be enough to buoy the price, recoil, if you want to call it that or not.
I was quoting the trailing revenue, and I think you're quoting forward revenue, 35 times forward revenue. But you never know.
Yeah. It includes the Anthropic revenue and the Google revenue for the Colossus 1 and Colossus 2 clusters is the 35x give or take multiple that is I think forward looking ARR is correct.
Interesting. Yeah, I know in my life I have a number of people who are like, especially I think being from Portland, people who are either very big Elon haters or deep Elon lovers. I think firmly just conceptually pro SpaceX, anti-buy early on the premise of the multiple just psycho a little bit. And if it were to stabilize significantly, I hadn't thought about the booing kind of effect you described him, but I wouldn't get in day zero. That sounds pretty generally risky.
If you have a retirement account of any kind, you'll be in before 30 days.
Also true. Yeah.
Well, the S&P is the index that matters, and that you've got until mid 2027 on that. They decided not to waive their rules of index requirement because this would be one of the biggest companies, and typically S&P 500 would have to include the 500 biggest companies, but they decided not to waive that. So it's at least 6 months. And there's a gap profitability test that, at least at this point, they would not pass.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I assume we will record tomorrow. I'll be curious to watch what the immediate flip of the switch ends up doing. And I think Twitter will be very, very live. At least I'm sure there's some call sheet bet or something or another on this. And it has to be hyper volatile in regards to what people are talking or commenting about on it. But perhaps we'll spare the event for the event. And see what happens tomorrow. Cool. All right. Catch y'all later. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you at SpaceX, I guess, IPO. Peace.